Welcome to today's Corporate Venturing Insider series. Today, I'm really excited to have Mike Smeed from InMotion Ventures joining us. He's, like he said himself, quite new into the CVC world, which means that he may have something fresh for all of us in terms of deploying and leveraging best practices. Mike, welcome.
Hi, Nicola. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, Mike, I always like to start with how did you get into corporate venturing?
I think, like many of us, I think I ended up in corporate venture capital a little bit by accident. My professional background is a finance professional. That's my home kind of function. And I know a lot of us come into leadership roles in CVCs from different functions. And I joined the Gillette graduate scheme back in 1998. So I'm showing my age here. I'm quite old as when it comes to this world.
It sounds young to me, so you're fine. Now, let's talk about your financial background because clearly being in charge of finance for a company, large or small, where you're following a distribution type of outcomes is very different discipline from a power law type of outcome. But maybe the corporation doesn't realize it's so different. Tell me about your background, how it's shaping you to be an investor, and how you have to adapt yourself, but adapt the corporation in terms of expectations.
Yeah, it's probably been one of the biggest transitions of turning from someone who always said no to someone who said yes, but what can we do? That was the biggest thing for me, was becoming an optimist, which is what we have to be in our lives. You know, when we know that 90% of the things that we do, we'll be lucky if we get our money back. It's quite a different switch. So I've seen things grow exponentially, and really being part of that, where really growth is part of the DNA. That really gave me the steer into coming into this role.
I can tell your experience in Shanghai, fast growth, taking risk, maybe calculated risk, it was a good experience for sure. Now, one element of your background is you came from the mothership. And also, I know that InMotion Ventures started in 2016. So you didn't start InMotion Ventures. So can you share about the advantage you saw from you being from the mothership, joining a CVC that was already ongoing, and how you could shape it the right way?
InMotion Ventures was started back in 2016, and like many CVC units at that point in time, was set up with someone with extensive VC background. The whole team was populated with VC professionals and had a very singular link to the CEO, and was acted very much as a looking at new business models, and very much focused on the development of the time in automotive and mobility, which were ACEs, so autonomous, connected, electrified, and shared ownership. Those were the big four core themes that really dominated mobility in the kind of 2015-16 range. And it was really helpful at that time to have a CVC unit which was very detached. We're called InMotion Ventures. We're not called JLR Ventures, and there was a particular reason for that, to make sure that whilst the business was performing incredibly well, that there was an area of not quite anonymity, but there was a lot of freedom for InMotion Ventures to go and invest in areas that could potentially be quite disruptive, both positively and negative, to the parent company. And in about 2021, we had a change in chief strategy officer. And quite often, as these things happen, when the chief strategy officer and the CEO move on in very short periods of time, there's a lot of changeover in units like CVC. And when I was coming back from China, our new CSO, who came from another automotive company and had experience of CVC, what he wanted was to bring InMotion much closer to the strategic direction of the company. He really recognized that this was an asset that we had underutilized in the past, and there's a lot of those big decisions on those themes had been made in terms of the make versus buy, that really he wanted us to change our direction. And really, yeah, it was luck on my part that I was ready to come back. So even though we're set up as an evergreen fund investing from JLR's balance sheet, we always talk about that period from 2016 to 21 as almost fund one. And fund two is where we started investing really at the end of 2022, the beginning of 23, and we call that fund two. So we reset the thesis. We pretty much changed everything. We had a bit more change in personnel, but we still retained the VC element. So I'm the only one in my team without a VC background. But again, it was, we've moved offices, we've changed Pretty much everything. We thought very carefully about the types of investors that we wanted to be, the type of investments we wanted to make. We spent a lot of time with the parent company and those business units, really clicking down into exactly what it was that we were going to be doing. But we also spent time really learning from people who've been doing this a long time, including yourself from the stuff that you've put out, and the great people at GCV as well, to really help on the best practice of how we can move really quickly. So as a corporate, we know that we're never going to quite hit the 48 hours from first call to signing a check, because there are elements working in a very highly regulated industry like automotive that we need to be a little bit more careful than some of our VC colleagues. But we have managed from 4 weeks, for example, from first call to signing a check, which we think is pretty quick from a kind of a corporate perspective. And those are the types of things that we've really refined. And also working with the parent company as well. That was a really big thing for us. Again, I was at Monterey at the GCV event in March of 2024, and a lot of our colleagues and peers were talking about, even though they've been doing this for 15 or 20 years, that really focusing in on the strategic benefits that you're bringing to the company are so important. Even if you've been doing this for 10, 15 years, given what we're facing into at the moment. And I literally came back from Monterey and I was like, literally stop everything we're doing. Let's get really clear on strategic. So we rewrote our investment memos. And I'm lucky that I've got people in our C-suite who really understand corporate investing and the power law, but they still want to make sure that we're being responsible as well.
It makes sense. I think geography matters a lot in venture capital. And I think if a CVC is based in the Bay Area, you end up learning from local VCs who have the power law nailed down and they understand superpower and bringing value to entrepreneurs, making bets, fund returners every time, even if it's a small probability. So I think you're right that, I mean, it's called GCV with a G for global. I think it really matters to learn from each other best practices. That's also why we do this podcast, because everyone around the world can just listen and learn from you and from many other practitioners. I want to go back to that CSO change in 2021. So do you report to the CSO?
I do. I'm actually on my second CSO.
Okay, you survived the change.
I know, yeah. I'm on my second CEO and my second CSO. So but I'm also at my 3-year average, and as we know, that's a very dangerous place for the leader of a CVC.
Good luck. So, what I find very interesting about InMotion Ventures is that you started in 2016 with a Fund One, what you call Fund One, which was really about exploration, this kind of really aspirational mega trends with the ACES acronym you just mentioned earlier. And in 2021, you pivoted to a exploitation mission, more towards direct value to the corporation. And I want to understand, how do you see the older portfolio companies and the younger portfolio companies contributing to your corporation?
I think that's a great question. And I think we see it as definitely an evolution. So, as you said, there were some really key mega trends that were happening at the end of the kind of 2015 through to that 2020 period. And it's also important to say, though, that at least 10 of those companies from that period are still active within our portfolio and are working very well and successfully with our parent companies. But we were really clear that from our perspective, we're focused on the climate, industrial, and enterprise technologies that are really going to shape JLR's future. So there's not a lot of car things in that future that we're looking to invest against, because the revised strategy of the company, which came with our new CEO and CSO in 2021, was one that was a really broad strategy about the type of company that JLR wanted to be, as opposed to purely the cars that we were going to build. But I'm really proud of the fact that in that fund two, the 12 companies that we've invested in since the beginning of 2023, 100%. So all of them have been working with JLR in some way. So we think it's a natural kind of evolution from where we've got to.
Very nice. Now I have a question for you. Can you share about your evergreen approach and the balance sheet advantage? Because most CVCs that are being built, they believe that balance sheet funding is bad. But actually, I think you have a good angle as to why balance sheet can be really good.
Yeah, so it was never really a thought of ours to approach it as a fund structure. I know there's been some studies that have been undertaken that, there's typically a very favorable view from investors, whether that's kind of debt holders or public investors, if your parent company has a discrete fund. And I think there's backup to show how people react to that. From our perspective, we really appreciate the flexibility that our evergreen structure provides. So we agree an annual deployment level from our parent company, and our board, as a wholly owned subsidiary of the parent company, has ultimate discretion up to that amount every year to invest on whatever it is that we want to invest on. So we've aligned the thesis, and now it's investing and deploying capital against that thesis. Clearly, the parent company will always ask us questions about why you've done that and all of those things. But ultimately, the decision rests with the three members of our investment committee and the board of directors of InMotion that I report into. So that provides us with a level of flexibility such that I don't feel under pressure to deploy all of that money. And our annual cycle goes from the 1st of April to the 31st of March. So I'm not one of those CVCs. And by the way, I've heard of them who run around in February and March and say, what have you got? I've got to deploy X amount of million into something, otherwise I lose it. So I've been involved in those conversations with other people, and that's never going to end well. But the key thing is that brings a very adult conversation with our parent company. And also, what it's enabled us to do, where there have been a couple of instances where we see a really good investment, but we would need to invest a certain amount of money, which would maybe be 30, 40, 50% of our annual capital deployment amount in that year. And the parent company has given us the discretion to say, yep, okay, we will give you a little bit more money to do that. And typically what would happen there is, with a little bit of Excel magic, we can move some budget from one element of the parent company into our line, and that gives us the flexibility to do that. And we've seen, as things get quite difficult at the moment in kind of investing, and we see that there are some pretty harsh terms coming through certain term sheets as we get into the later stages, that actually having that flexibility to maybe follow on in an investment where we don't have to have that discrete level of reserve really quite important.
Not necessarily, but I will try to unpack everything you said. And that comes to one of the things you said earlier, and I want to understand that better, which is you spend a lot of time with your team to think about what type of investor you want to be. So let me ask you, what type of investor do you want to be?
We wanted to be good to work with. We wanted to deliver on the promises and commitments that we made. And we wanted to be exceptional investors. Those were the three things that kind of held us. And I think in this industry, I'm beginning to see, as things get more competitive, we're starting to see some pretty bad behaviors in certain instances. And therefore, this industry is full of people who are talking about what they're going to do. They say a lot of things, but actually what we wanted to do was to deliver on that and to make a tangible impact. And we didn't realize that being good people to work with would be as much of a USP as actually it's turned out to be. And when founders do their diligence on us, because they do, that's typically the referral that they get, is actually when they talk to other investors that we work with and also startups in our portfolio, they really recognize that we haven't built one, we're building a reputation, I hope, that is one in which we're really delivering on that. And I think that's something where, again, going back to the point right at the beginning of the conversation, credibility is such an important thing. And we all know that we're working in an industry where not every single thing that we do is going to work out, but how you get from even before your first call all the way through to an exit, and whether that exit is the exit we all wanted or one that didn't quite play out the way that we intended, you can still have an amazing relationship with people all the way through that process. And that's something that we take on really dearly. We have a very strict rule in terms of, and I won't say it on a podcast what we call that rule, but we have a very strict rule about who we work with because, again, when we are investing in people, we know, particularly at the seed and Series A stage that we invest in, we're going to be in this for the next 5, 6, maybe even 10 years. And therefore, what we want to make sure is that we can build relationships with these people, with fellow founders and investors, and we can make sure that that not only do we represent them incredibly well at events in our parent company, but also when we invite them to events at our corporate headquarters. You don't want to be sat there really nervous thinking, my God, what are they going to say? You want them to be incredibly well balanced and authentic to them. And that's something that's really important.
I think there are two proof points you already gave about the type of investor you want to be. You mentioned the example where from the first meeting to investing was 4 weeks. And then there's the other one, which you said in the last 12 investments you've made, 12 have engagements with the mothership. So let's unpack a little bit because I want to be practical for those who are listening and thinking about how to implement their CVC the same way. What did you do so that you could be as fast as 4 weeks?
There's a couple of things. One is that it's interesting. When I was preparing for this and I was doing a little bit of thinking, I know that at TDK Ventures, you talk a lot about being thesis driven. And I was thinking, well, I'm not sure we are thesis driven. And then actually, I then unpicked it a little bit more and then I realized we totally are. So we have 3 core verticals: climate tech, which is supporting JLR's sustainability ambitions, so to be net zero by 2039. Industrial technologies, these are the technologies that are going to transform companies that engineer, that manufacture, and that move either finished goods or raw materials around. And then enterprise technologies, which is disruptive technologies that will really help and support enterprises grow. And then we then have a deep tech enabler across the bottom. And those deep tech enablers are happening across climate, industrial, and enterprise. So there's a hell of a lot of overlap between what we work. Now, I'm incredibly lucky that I have my 2 investment principals are amazing. So Louis looks after our climate investing, and Sam, she looks after our industrial and enterprise verticals. And both of those are firmly working together with the senior leaders within our parent company of those verticals. And as I mentioned, they meet with them quite regularly. Then that feeds us into our investment committee. Now we have 3 members on our investment committee. They all come from the parent company, one of which is our CSO. So we have our JLR board member who's on our investment committee, alongside another member of the strategy team and the finance director for our area as well. And we have a process by which we do not have regular investment committees. Now, what we realized with our board members is that it's much easier for me to get in their diary tomorrow than it is in 3 months' time. So we have an investment committee that we can pull together incredibly quickly. And we have 2 investment committees that we have. One is where we officially make the decision, and that is a board meeting. And as a subsidiary of our parent company, that is a governed meeting, which is governed by our company secretarial. But we also have a slightly less formal investment committee where we would discuss the investments that we are ready to go to our investment committee for approval. But we also say, look, these are the things that we've seen. And we would do like 1-page investment memo, which has 4 quadrants on it. What is the company? What do they do? What's the financial terms of the investment? And why should InMotion Ventures invest? And once we've satisfied those 4 quadrants, it enables us then to build that investment memo that not only is tailored around the specific decision, but also overcomes some of those biases that some of our investment committee members will bring into the room.
Very nice. Now I have a question for you. Do you need all 3 to vote yes, or 2 is enough?
So we have 2 types of decision. So if we have an investment committee in person, I need 2 out of 3. However, if we need to move really quick, then we are able to do a decision via email, but I need all 3 if I do it via email. And that is a And that's part of our corporate governance for what's called I don't know whether this is an official legal term, but it's called a circular resolution as opposed to a board meeting.
And that's a golden nugget, which is allowing for email approvals as long as you have unanimity of the IC. And I think that's a really cool concept. So that's a golden nugget. I really like it. But it's the first time I hear this. And this is really cool because, like you said, speed matters. And sometimes it's really hard, especially when your IC are corporate officers, top management, to get them all coming at the same time for typically more than 1 hour. And so I think you have found a really good model here. Where I was going is the next one, which is the second proof point of your last 12 investments, all have engagements with the mothership. Typically, it comes with some level of requirement for a championship from a business group to say, yes, if you invest in this company, I'm interested. Do you have that or you don't need it?
So we have what we call diligence. So I think that's quite important. We started off in the very early stages of our first maybe 6 months of investing against our new thesis, and we called it sponsorship. And we said, what we want is we want to have someone from the parent company sponsor an investment. And basically, we didn't invest anything because everyone was really scared in the parent company that what does sponsorship
Yep.
mean? Does this mean that it's my fault if it goes wrong? Does it mean that I'm personally validating that this is the correct? What is it? Do I have to pay for the investment? Well, so they just all ran away, and we just okay.
Yes, sponsorship is a loaded word.
It's very loaded, yeah. So the impact of that was we said, okay, that's not going to work. So we went back to the drawing board and we pivoted to okay, what about diligence? What if we said to people, look, you're the experts in this area, in the vast majority of the areas that we're investing in. You've got within your teams hundreds of experience. We've got the access to 8,000 engineers globally within JLR that have typically seen something. Can you help us? Can you get on a call with a founder and then let us know what you think? So what we want is your diligence on the technology and the founder. And is this a really neat solution with or without a problem? So we take that very seriously, that we do not interfere in any of the commercial relationships between the portfolio company and the parent company. And we say, look, if we're doing our job correctly, then we will bring you something that is unique and that will pass the quality as well as the performance and the price hurdle. It just so happens that, and I'll give you an example of a portfolio company of ours called Chipflow, who look at the designing of custom-made semiconductors at relatively low volumes. Now, JLR is a relatively small company in the kind of global automotive kind of world. We produce around 400,000 vehicles a year, whereas if you're in Ford or Toyota or Hyundai, you're talking about millions of vehicles every year. So we're big in the UK as a brand, but globally we're probably better known for Range Rovers and Jaguars and Defenders rather than producing millions of vehicles. And when we were introduced by a VC to Chipflow, they really wanted us to validate that, again, that the problem that they were looking to solve existed. And when we spoke to the semiconductor strategy team at JLR, they said, no, look, this is something that maybe in 2027, maybe in 2028, we might look at. But right now, our heads are down with all the big semiconductor companies really ensuring that we produce everything that we need. So post our investment, we then introduced them, and they had 3 hours in our head office about 4 weeks after we invested. And the feedback we got was, my God, they're amazing. We didn't realize this was possible. And then within 4 months, they had agreed a proof of concept. They produced an ASIC of a chip in record time, much lower cost than they ever expected. So immediately, that was something that we went into it thinking, that intersection between the parent company and our portfolio company, we were really comfortable that this was a couple of years down the line, as was the team at Chipflow as well. And all of a sudden, things came together a lot quicker. And I think, again, that's part of our role.
And it's also a beautiful success stories for you to show to other business group leaders as well as entrepreneurs. Now, I had One question which I thought was very interesting, you have an open innovation, which is not investing in the startups. They don't get equity, but they engage with the startups and the mothership. Can you share with me maybe some best practice about how a CVC and an open innovation center should work together? What type of isolation they should have from each other? What type of synchronization they should have to help the mothership get maximum value from each?
That's a great question because they're very complementary, but they're very different. And I
Yeah.
think it's very easy to sometimes get them muddled up, and we've got to be very careful. So, InMotion Ventures, as the venture capital arm of JLR, and then JLR have their open innovation program. So, even in the way we talk about the branding of the two is very separate. Of course, there are instances where they work together incredibly well. So, through the problem based or problem statement based approach of venture clienting, they're able to really search for a number of different areas. So, again, we look at those things complementary, but careful to make sure that when we're talking about them both internally and externally, we're very clear that they're very separate disciplines.
Very important. Mike, thank you for this interview. I think you shared with us a really cool design, very thoughtful design for the goals you set for the CVC. And some of them were truly new to me, and I thought that was really cool. So thank you, Mike.
Thanks, Nicolas. It was a great pleasure to talk to you.